More than 2 weeks after release, the Atlantis rods have finally been fixed. Most of these rods were originally awful and were also broken. So now that they're working, which ones are actually good? Starting with what was originally the worst rod, the Tempest rod. The description of this rod states, "This rod moves faster than the eye can follow. Its wind-blessed line cuts through water like lightning, allowing for rapid-fire casting and retrieval," which would suggest that the rod is able to attract and catch fish quickly. Before the update, this rod had an embarrassing 15 lure speed, which is one of the worst in the game, especially at this stage. Soon it was buffed to 60%, which still is not rapid fire. And with that buff came a 50% luck increase, which was 120 total. Then finally the lure speed was increased to 90, making it equal to the no life rod. That means getting a fish on your line happens almost instantly. Now it was actually starting to live up to its description. And on top of this, they gave it a passive. The passive increases your progress speed by 15%, which is the only rod that does this. Overall, these stats pretty much make this rod a better version of the no life rod, besides the fact that it has a weight limit. So this makes it a very viable option for getting more XP, but it is extremely pricey still. Next up is the Champion's Rod. The biggest difference made with this rod was the price, which decreased from 1 million to 80k. The fact that the price changed this much shows you how not worth it was and how bad the stats were. But the stats were only bad when compared to the price. So the fact that this is cheaper now makes it a little bit better, but more for getting rarer fish as opposed to getting more money. Hasty would be a good enchantment for this rod, but it's still not recommended to get this rod overall. Next up we have the Depth Seeker. This rod's luck was buffed and its price was reduced from 125,000 to 40,000. But this is just a mediocre rod, you shouldn't get it. Now we're going to talk about the Abyssal Spectre rod. This rod is known for having the highest resilience in the game, but that doesn't really make it good. It had its lure speed and control buffed, but this only makes it better for catching difficult fish and isn't good for money. So really, I wouldn't buy this rod unless you have nothing else to do. Next up is the Poseidon rod. This rod was one of the only ones that partially worked on release. This is also one of the better rods overall because it's kind of useful for money. It has two passives, the first one being a 25% chance to give the player 75% of the value of the fish they are currently reeling in. That's kind of a mouthful. So in simpler terms, if you catch a fish that costs 1,000 and this passive gets activated, you will get 750 coins immediately. The second passive is the one that was not functional on release. There's a 10% chance for a ghost to spawn above your fish and activate the King's Blessing passive. This passive makes the fish that you catch 75 to 150% bigger and gives it the King's Blessing mutation, which multiplies value by 3.5 times. This kind of makes this passive more just for fun because catching big fish isn't necessarily helpful, especially at a 10% chance. So overall, the Poseidon's rod is not horrible, but you wouldn't pick it over something like the Rod of the Depths, unfortunately. Now we get to talk about the Zeus rod, which is pretty interesting. The Zeus rod, similarly to the Tempest rod, had a description that was originally a complete lie. The Zeus rod claims to be able to cast at unprecedented speeds, and that it can command storms. On release, the Zeus rod did absolutely nothing, and on top of this, the lure speed was just dookie. For this update, they buffed the lure speed from 40 to 70, they buffed the resilience from 15 to 20, and they fixed the passive. The passive is probably the only useful thing about this rod, and that is the ability to summon storms. The word storm refers to a little purple disc. After every catch, there's a 10% chance for a storm to spawn. Anything caught within this disc has a 95% chance to have the electric shock mutation. The other 5% are given the charred mutation. Electric shock multiplies value by 3.5. Charred, on the other hand, halves the value of any fish that has it. Despite the storm having a big area, nobody else can use it, and you also can't switch rods. However, as I am making this video, the thunderstorm passive sets your luck to 0 no matter what. I'm not sure if this is on purpose or not, but that pretty much makes this rod useless. Before we get to the updated Kraken rod, I just want to say you should subscribe if you like easy to understand and fast guides. Finally, and probably the most interesting, is the Kraken rod. The Kraken rod, like the Poseidon rod, partially worked on release. It has probably the most unique passives in the game, the most notable of which being its ability to give you a completely random legendary, mythic, or exotic fish from your unlocked bestiary every 50 catches. In this clip, probably the absolute worst thing possible happened. You can see I got an Aurora Pearl from the Kraken rod, and this is already one of the worst mythics in the game, but I looked it up and it's 0 kilograms. So I brought it to the appraiser. Okay, never mind. Anyways, this rod also has the ability to duplicate any fish that you catch at a 10% chance. And finally, it can give fish the Tentacle Surge mutation at a 5% chance. Tentacle Surge is the best mutation in the game, multiplying value by 10 times. This sounds absolutely amazing, but it's a 5% chance, so it's absolutely not viable. So, now that all of them are fixed, which Atlantis rods are actually usable? Well, if I'm being honest, it seems like the Poseidon rod and the Tempest rod are the two that make the most sense to get. And again, if I'm being honest, none of these rods are really meta even after the buffs.